Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Lou Shipley, senior lecturer at Harvard, and we're going to talk about Lou's book, which is maybe similar to my book, but sounds like it goes in a very different direction, and I'm really excited to dive into the conversation. Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself. Lou, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Colin. And when we did our prep call, I ordered your book. I loved it. I think it's really great. People should buy your book.
Thank you. I also ordered your book. It's sitting very short way away from me, but I haven't had a chance to read it. I apologize for that.
That's all right.
I'm very much looking forward to it, though. Some of the stories that we talked about in the pre-interview sound like just like the perfect clickbait for the rest of the book. And so I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah.
I want to start with kind of maybe the history of Lou. You know, it takes a lot to write a book. You know, I look at people that are authors and like their career is as an author. And I'm like, how are you writing so many books? Like, where do you get, I felt like I had 12, 13 years of experience that went into writing my book. And so I know that there's got to be a rich history in order for you to write a great book like the one you did. And we're going to talk about that. I want to start with the history that kind of went into creating that book. And so where does that history start for you?
Well, it's a little bit like your history. In college, I needed to finance my degree. So I took a job selling study guides door to door, encyclopedias. And I made enough to stay in college, but really I learned the importance.
Wait, was that, sorry to interrupt you, was that Southwestern Company?
It was. Did you do that?
I came this close. They wanted to ship me off to like Pennsylvania. And I was like, I really want to play hockey and I don't want to leave. So I'm like, I had the paperwork. I was going to sign off. I had like my team lead and everything. So you went and did that.
I did Southwestern.
Tell me more about that experience. Cause it was one of those like paths. Like, I wonder if that was the right choice or not.
Oh, it was, well, I really did need, because the financial aid got cut and as my mom and dad were like, you got to find some money here. And there was an opportunity. It's 100% commission sales job. And I went down and got trained in Nashville. And then they said, your territory is DeKalb County, Illinois. And they basically said every town has a park and every park has a bench, which is, how you figure out where you're going to stay. So the first night you stay on a park bench. Then we found this, university in Northern Illinois for $5 a night and stay in like this dorm room.
Park has a bench? No way.
And then, so I started selling and I did pretty well. And one day I was selling Saturdays too. I used a elementary school to go to the men's room and I left my book box with all my orders in it, and the town sheriff picked it up, and so my book orders were gone. So I went down to the sheriff, and I got kicked out of town because I hadn't bought a solicitor's license because I didn't want to spend like $8 for a solicitor's license. So he kicked me out of town. He escorted me out of town.
No way.
So, but I learned so much in that process that you can sell. You learn how to sell and deal with rejection and failure and falling off a front porch when it's not deep enough and take a step back, all that stuff. It was just a great experience.
Amazing. Money wise, how'd you do?
I did well enough to more than all my friends made in their summer jobs, teaching golf or whatever people did. But I actually made a lot of money, and I got the first year salesperson award. I should have it here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but anyway, I realized that sales is a really good way to make money, and actually
amazing. I ended up taking a slightly different route. I went hockey, and then I ended up in sales later that summer in like a B2B sales job. I think I was like, it was my first summer out of college. But this is about you, not me. And so you've come a long way since the Southwestern Corp. What happened next, and where are we going here?
Yes, I went to Trinity College. Actually, going to be giving their commencement address this in 2 weeks, and I'm talking about selling books door to door. And then went to Wall Street for a little while. Then I went to Harvard Business School, where I took a class called Entrepreneurial Finance, which was like this class about how to fund an idea, how to start a company. And I didn't have an idea of my own, but I cold called the founder of a company called Avid Technology, which is the pioneer of digital video editing. And I got a meeting with the founder, and he looked at my resume and he said, "You look uniquely unqualified for a career in technology, but you should never underestimate the value of an in-person meeting." I think this is a really good lesson for the young people today. And he hired me as a consultant, and then I started selling because they didn't have any sales reps in the south of the US. So even a Yankee could go down there and make a few sales.
Amazing. And so how do you go from there to starting your first company?
Yeah. So, well, I went from there. Actually, I got asked, you'll like this, Colin. I got asked, started selling in the South, and then the CEO of the company said, "Hey, we have somebody running North America. We have somebody running Europe. Can you just take the rest of the world?" That was literally my title. And the biggest market was Japan. So I moved to Japan, I started selling there, opened the office, and grew that business. And so that hyper growth first experience was like, I'm never going back to a big company. Like, because I'd worked in a big company before. Like, I'm going to spend my whole career in startups. I just love being in these sort of hard, but exciting places where you're disrupting industries and figuring out new stuff. So after that, I did a couple others. We sold one to Cisco, sold a company called Webline to Cisco. And then my first CEO gig was a company called Reflectant Software, which we sold to Citrix. So yeah, so I ended up being CEO 3 times. And then after I sold Black Duck, I decided to just do boards. And that's when I had enough time to start thinking about writing a book.
Right on. Now, you mentioned that your second company, you got fired, and there was
Yeah.
a story about the forecasting formula. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, yeah. So company did really, really well, but I missed a couple quarters. And in a high pressure venture world, like if you miss some quarters, you go. And I was worried I wouldn't be hired as a CEO again. And I was at Black Duck, and I really I spent my time on forecasting and forecasting accuracy. We built some new products, but we developed a whole new sales model. We call it the plane model, where instead of just hiring enterprise sales reps in big cities, we put little pods together, and they had a whole promotion system. So someone could start we used a plane as an analogy, where there's a gunner who did outbound, and a navigator who did inbound, and a co-pilot who closed small deals, and a pilot that closed big deals. And then when you were ready, when that unit of sales capacity covered its cost, you'd launch a new plane with a co-pilot becoming a pilot of a new one. And it really worked. It was the first time in my career I understood kind of the cost of my sales to my growth, and we plotted where we were before we launched new planes. So it was really interesting, and that's partly when Synopsys bought us. They wanted our distribution model for some of their products.
It sounds like very much like the specialize your sales role idea that came out of Salesforce. And I'm not claiming that
Yeah.
that was
Oh,
unique
yes.
or new,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think Aaron's first book, or not first book, but first book that like really sold huge numbers was one of I think my favorite ideas from predictable revenue and I think the one that probably caught on the most, even though it gets derided for all the cold email stuff, but it was the
Yep.
specialization of sales roles. It sounds
Yeah.
like you were onto the same path as well here.
Yeah, we did. The key was hiring, and where you hired people from, and then training and enabling them, and then giving people a sort of a pathway to promotion based on specific, performance objectives. And there's still about half the people that were running that are still there at Black Duck, doing well. One of the women who started as a cold caller is now running like a 50-person sales team, and it's just great to see people, basically follow a pattern, and then do really well in a structured system. Not to say people, can't do their own thing, but I did find that putting some organization around it and training and enabling the salespeople made the big difference.
Totally. Talk to me about there was a forecasting formula you mentioned in the pre-call.
Yeah. Oh, so the head of sales ops, I hired a guy named Ed Loftus, who was just amazing. And we had no sales ops at the company when I got there. And so I had him report directly to me. So not to the CFO and not to the head of sales, because it was really, really broken. And so we developed sort of a math equation called the velocity sales equation for our smaller, sort of sub 50K deals. There's still a big enterprise sales team that, those deals just take a long time. But we were really able to figure out, basically with marketing input and with outbound cold calling, how to start to predict maybe 35-40% of a quarter. And then that's when we got really predictable. Because if you can go into a quarter knowing, you can get more than a third, then you're gonna probably not be in the situation where I was in my previous company, where it was like, well, we'll make the quarter if we get this deal. That's just no way to live, because you make a quarter, miss a quarter, make a quarter, miss a quarter, and before you know it, you're out.
I lived that as a rep, and I fortunately had uh, I wasn't asked to leave too many times, but I would have the huge quarter. Like I remember I had a $1 million quota, and I think I hit 2 million in total revenue, total sales in Q2 at the beginning of Q2. And so I've doubled my quota for the year, and come Q, sales managers come around and be like, "Hey, what have you done for me lately?" And I'm like, "Are we
Yeah.
really having a performance conversation? You know the big bonus check you're going to write me?" I'm like, some of these big sales take time. And that was like, it was poor planning on my part. it was also part just extreme luck. A couple deals got pulled forward, but you're totally right. You're only as good as your last 3, 6 months, and a couple of bad quarters means you might be looking for something new. And so
Exactly.
I'm curious, how is that translated to, how you carried yourself in the next role? Is that where the kind of genesis of the planes idea came from?
Well, so it's interesting. I don't know if you've heard of famous playwright Neil Simon. He had a quote called "Failure gets me up earlier the next morning than success." And I just found that failing really got me motivated not to have the same thing happen again. So I took it so seriously
Hmm.
that I had to build a team of people that took it like really seriously, and like missing was just not okay. And it's and then also part of it, as you know, as being a CEO, is like learning how to forecast and manage your board. That was for me probably the hardest learning of being a CEO, because you come up through a function, you're good at your function, and you sort of know what you're doing, but you get to a board and you're like, I don't really know how to manage this thing. And so learning how to be aggressive enough to keep them happy, but not so aggressive that you're at risk of missing.
Can you tell me about a time when maybe that balance got a little bit out of whack?
Yeah, that was where, the previous company was Turbonomic, where I just, set the bar too high, and we did grow a lot, but I just wasn't at the budget that I needed to be.
It is an interesting role to go from. I think you and I had kind of had a similar trajectory, which was like IC manager and then into kind of founder. And I was very, very temporarily a sales manager. And so I didn't have that like managing skill. Even though I was one, I didn't have it, which I think is probably true for maybe some of the sales managers that are out there, because nobody teaches you this stuff.
Right, right, right. They just assume take the best rep and put them in charge.
Totally.
That was
And when
all
you
done.
you step up, it's like you go from playing hockey to football. And you're like, this is a totally new field. And I was really good at shooting the puck, but I don't know how to throw a ball.
You're gonna have to tell me in this how who you played for, 'cause it sounds like you were good. Did you play in the juniors?
Nah, I had invites to play for like the lowest of lowest levels of amateur teams, and I recognized that I had skill. I had enough skill to maybe make one of the worst amateur teams in
Mhm.
the world, maybe, but I certainly wasn't going to make any money from it. So like I would consider myself a decent hockey player, but not a good one or a great one. Not a professional by any stretch of the imagination.
I still play. I played this morning. When people ask me how good I was, I'll say, my team Trinity won the ECAC championship back in the day, but that was the year after I graduated.
There you go. So you left the team when they finally did well.
Exactly. Played the foundation.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I coached, I taught, I played, refereed. So I spent a bunch of time on the ice. I was on the ice so much one summer. This was the summer in between high school and college. I was teaching hockey camps and doing drywall. I think I spent 70 hours at the rink for like 2 weeks in a row when the camps were really busy, and 40 hours of those were in skates.
Wow.
And by the end of it, I couldn't feel my toes. And I went to the doctor, and the doctor's like, yeah, if you don't stop putting your feet in skates and like take it easy, you're never going to feel your toes again.
So,
The funniest
oh,
part of that story is like I finished the camps. It was only like another week or so, and then I literally couldn't feel my toes for a year.
oh
I
my
would
God.
I would fall going upstairs because my toes wouldn't feel them, so I'd trip and fall. And I remember I have so many memories of like I would always run up the stairs so that I would be on the balls of my feet, so that I wouldn't be tempted to like miss, or there was no chance of me missing. And I still run upstairs like frequently, and I'm like, why am I doing it? I'm like, oh yeah, because of that year I couldn't feel my toes.
I'm going to have to give this recording to my future son-in-law is from Toronto. Very good hockey player. Played at Middlebury. Great guy, but he'll love this story. That's so much time in skates. That's
Yeah. I mean, I think there's something in there about like being an entrepreneur and not knowing when to quit, and
Mm.
you do something you love and it's just, hey, there it is. I want to do more of it. And there's no like, we needed help. I'm gonna be the guy to help.
Well,
Like,
like the loss of time. Well, actually, one of in my book, I had profiled 17 different entrepreneurs. One of them is a guy named Murli Thurumali. Started 3 companies, sold them all after the age of 40. And he talks about and I end the book with this line that entrepreneurship. It's so like people say, why do you do it? It's so hard. He said, when it succeeds, it's a gift to yourself. I just thought that was a really cool note. He also said he did 3 companies, and he did what he says you should always ask yourself about the supermarket test. And the supermarket test is when you walk into the supermarket and somebody who worked for you walks in, do they either hide behind the Cheetos because they couldn't stand you, or they come up and say, "Hey, how you doing? I love working with you." And
Mm.
more people liked working for him and then started their own businesses. It's sort of a legacy.
I was texting with somebody who worked for me last night, and she's now a founder of her own startup, and it sounds like they're doing
Isn't that
extremely well.
cool?
It is the greatest feeling of like she was literally working in the bar below our office, and she was a friend of one of our SDRs, and he's like, I think she'd be great. We ended up hiring her,
Oh, I love it.
and she SDR. She was a sales leader with us. She did sales development consulting with us for a while, and then she left to work with one of our clients. And now she's the a co-founder in her own startup.
It's such a great story. Did you?
Couldn't
That's so great.
couldn't be happier. Couldn't be
I mean,
happier.
my first startup, Avid Technology, I think 27 people became CEOs from that. Like it was such a good experience that so many people built other companies around sort of this big diaspora.
I want to get into the book. I want to get into kind of the decision to write a book because it is a long, solitary, kind of insane journey. You have to, I couldn't help. And I think you probably had the same thing with Unlikely Entrepreneurs is you're writing a book about building great companies and about product market fit and all the work that
Mm,
goes into product market fit. But it's very hard to interview your future audience, as
mm.
much as you try on like, hey, do you feel like there's a gap in the market for a book like this? So how did you
So
get?
this so I actually wrote chapters. Basically, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and I'd written some stuff I called it Tales from the Field because I'd went through so many crazy experiences selling stuff that didn't work. Like I sold one Avid that caught fire when the customer turned it on. Like I was just thinking that but it turns out that my stories from the field wasn't what I think people wanted to hear. I wanted to tell other people's stories, which is what we do. We have 17 different entrepreneurs that we profile. And I actually did co-authored it with a woman named Trish Favreau, who when I was teaching at MIT, she approached me about it because she's like, she wanted to be an entrepreneur, but she didn't have the guts for it, she basically said. And she was mad at herself. She wanted to tell the stories of other people. So I sourced all the entrepreneurs in this book, and these are just people I know from my network. But it is more work than you think. It's a lot of work, but it's very gratifying to sort of see it out and to see it selling. And then I just like telling other people's stories. And what did you learn from other people's stories? And I just think the story concept works well with people.
What was the biggest surprise writing the book?
What was my biggest surprise? Just well, I read, and maybe you did when you wrote. I read Stephen King's book on writing, which is sort of autobiographical about how he became a writer and how his wife helped him and all this stuff. And it was he had a quote in there. He said, "To write is human, to edit is divine." And I just thought the editing process of tying it and thinking about King writes about when is someone going to put your book down? Like, how do you keep people's attention? So the hardest part was just learning how to be a better storyteller. I'm a decent writer, but storytelling is a whole art form in itself.
Trying to figure out how to get all the stories, how to keep them, point with all
On
the
point.
right, with the right fidelity of detail. That was
Right.
I think the hard part. One of the
Yeah.
parts I struggled with. And then you've got all the stories, and then how do you package them up into something that's actually going to help the reader go on this journey and learn something from it instead of
Yeah.
just being 17 stories that just kind of
Right.
stand on.
Yeah, the through line, I think, is what, it's a little bit like a speech where there has to be a through line, and it's easy to just get lost in that. King writes about writing with the door open, meaning just getting all your thoughts down, and writing with the door closed, of like making sure you think you know who your ideal reader is. This actually, Colin, this is pretty interesting. So when we put the proposal together, we figured it would be startup founders, students of mine, maybe venture capital firms would be mine. So I get my first big book order, and it's from HP Hood, the milk company. It's a 180-year-old company. I'm like, what's going on here? So I met the CEO of HP Hood. He goes, oh, if we weren't entrepreneurial, we wouldn't survive. Like HP Hood now is the number 2 milk supplier in the US, but they do it as an OEM to Walmart. You just don't see their brand. They have almond breeze, lactate, and oat milk. You can still buy a Hoodsy in like a regular cottage cheese or whatever, but it's just so fascinating. And so I started to think about how many companies are there in the US anyway, and there's 33 million. How many are over 100 years old? There's only 1,000. So it's just so interesting. So this book and your book are great for like people realizing you're going to be disrupted. You have to keep innovating in order to survive.
I'm really curious. You kind of mentioned the through line a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Did you have that through line before you started writing the book? or did you find it after you started writing?
It's so interesting. It really started after because we wanted to get, this is not a book about, there's software companies in here, but this is not a book like about Silicon Valley AI billionaires. Not that I have any problem with them. It's just,
Mhm.
this is more about entrepreneurs with like, we have a guy who sells caskets online, or, I mean, I got
Got it.
to know a woman who runs a tire store in a town over. I got to know her because I kept popping my tire on this new curb that my town put in. So I'm like, I saw her written up in the paper and I wanted to hear her story. And it's fascinating. These people that come from like with this just an idea, how do you build a business and what are the values you have for raising money and managing a team and doing all the things you need to do to be successful and run a business. So it took us a little while to assemble all these different stories and then get the sort of the key. And we use a lot of stuff I teach at HBS, sort of the lessons learned in the classroom. And that's sort of part of the through line of like how people, and we have some failures. We talk about failures. A lot of the companies I've invested in that failed, like why they
Mm.
fail. And so we talk about failures, not just, losses, not just wins.
Love it. And so kind of bridging into the book, and because you're right, the losses you almost learn more from
Oh,
than the
totally.
wins. Talk to me about the through line of the book. And so like if I go and read all these 17 stories, what is the takeaway going to be? Or what are some of what is the one thing that you hope a
Yeah.
reader gets out of the book?
So it's interesting. It is very similar to what you talk about in terms of getting your first customers and the terrifying art of finding customers. And I love that title. We went back and forth, my co-author Trish and I, on the title of the book, and we went with Unlikely Entrepreneurs because it was kind of a good catch. But we almost named it "What's the First Chapter," which is called "The Problem with the Problem," and it's
Mm,
all about you as an entrepreneur. Is your idea really worthy of you starting this company? And how do you know? And there's sort of two ways I've seen. One is you have a visceral pain understanding like doing something, building something, using a product that just doesn't work, that you need to find one that does. So I profiled Bill Warner, the founder of Avid, which is digital video editing. He had been trying to edit on film and it just, was analog versus digital. So
mm,
he understood the pain so well that he knew what product to build. And even then, it changes and morphs as your customers use it. But if you don't have visceral pain associated with it, like how do you do this? And this is where you have to make, hundreds of calls to people and ask them and not do the mom test, but, really ask, is this really worth your time? How much would you pay? Is this a top priority? And that is like the main thing that I see with failure, because if you can raise venture capital with a bad idea just because somebody wants to invest in you, but that doesn't mean you have a right to exist, and you don't until you start selling your product.
until customers start trading you some money for it.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That's a good way to say it.
Totally. I'm glad you went with Unlikely Entrepreneurs. The problem with the problem is exactly like kind of the problem that what I was writing about. And I could see how people would say, "Hey, that's a hard title." Because
Yeah.
it takes a minute of explanation to grok it
Yes.
exactly. But once you get it, you're like, "Oh yeah, yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense." Perfect
Mm,
chapter title.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We almost, and our publisher, Wiley, really wanted Unlikely Entrepreneurs. Problem with the problem is sort of, so then it starts with, all right, now that you've done that and you've figured out how to sell it, all right, how do you, the second chapter is, delegate sales at your peril, which is again completely consistent with your book. I see a lot of founders like, I got the product, I don't really like the sales stuff, let's just hire a sales guy. It's like,
Mhm.
mm, don't do that.
I'm so glad I got my book out first, because had I read yours first, I probably wouldn't have written mine. Like the mom test kind of covers some of what I cover, but like I wanted to build that just like you, the bridge between kind of what should I build? How do I determine if I should build it? And then once I've made that call, how do I find customers for it?
How do you find customers? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then how do you raise money? And so the through line there is, once you've done those things, then you start building your team, and then you're going to have to pivot. So we have a class. I do a case study on two founders that pivoted very well, but they were at a near death moment when they pivoted. So
Founders near death.
what's that?
I said, aren't all founders near death? Whether you want to admit it or not. Every company is like a bad quarter away from like,
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not for the faint of heart. Then we have a chapter in there on endings and beginnings, which is entrepreneurship, because the research out of MIT says the best age to start a business and most likelihood of success is age 44. And I still think we've had this notion of you got to go drop out of Harvard and be Bill Gates or whatever. But
Mhm.
the reality is you have a better chance of winning if you've had some experience, seen what good looks like, saved some money, have a network. So we profile three people that founded companies in their 50s. And it's just really, really been fun to tell their stories.
That's amazing. So tell me more, like what stood out about the folks that you profiled that were in their 50s that maybe the folks that were younger when they got started hadn't quite
Yeah.
figured out yet? Because I
Yeah.
can resonate with that as being I just cracked the 40-year mark last year. And I started my first company when I was 27. And like I had 1,000% more confidence back then and 0% of the knowledge I have now. So like I
Mm.
look back on that guy and he had a
Yeah.
ton of energy, but he was an idiot.
But a good hockey player.
Kind of. That's debatable. So yeah, what did you notice or what stood out about the folks that were kind of the in their fifth generation versus those of us that started in the third generation?
Yeah. So one of the guys I profiled, a guy named Dave Picarella, who started a brewery called Twin Barns in up in New Hampshire, one town over from where I am. And he and his buddy Bruce just love beer, and they were both successful, executives. Dave's a consultant, but he didn't like his job. He just when he got an offer for a buyout, he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to start a brewery." And he's done really, really well, and that was just his passion. So the second one that we profiled is a guy named Charlie Tillinghast, who's a classmate of mine from business school, he was the president of MSNBC News Interactive, and he'd started Breaking News. I don't know if you ever watched that, but Breaking News was like one of their top shows on MSNBC. But MSNBC got sold, and they canceled the product, and so he basically started that Breaking News as instead of an advertising model, as a subscription business, and he runs that now. So there's an example, kind of like big companies sometimes do stupid things. He's like, I can't believe they're killing this business. I'm going to go run it. That was just interesting. Sometimes you just see these opportunities the longer you get along in your career. And then a lot of the final one, Murley, the supermarket test guy, he just loves starting new businesses and is very, technically savvy. This was after he had a long career at Hewlett Packard. I just think people sort of love being able to run their own business, and it seems like all three of them have had the curiosity and the passion to go out and do it.
It's nice to know that the option isn't off the table the later you get in life.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why I actually see this in my Harvard class. Students are actually under pressure to start and be
Mm,
founders because it's so the in thing now. And I try and tell them, don't do it now. Go get a job and learn what good looks like. If you don't have an idea for it, that's back to the problem with the problem. If your idea isn't good enough, then don't do it. Go get a job or find a startup and then see what good looks like, and you can do it later in life.
totally. I want to save some time because there was a couple interesting stories we talked about in the pre-interview, and one of those was the casket story.
Scott Ginsburg is a friend of mine who had been in the casket business. He actually made caskets, and then he sold that business very successfully. And he likes to ski, so he blew out his knee, and he was sitting around, and he said to his wife, "Do you think I could sell one of these online?" And she's like, "I don't know, just try it." So he sold one on Amazon. He's like, "Oh, this works." So he started Titan Casket, and I mean, who would have thunk that? Who would have thought that you could do that? So I actually had him come into my
Could you sell it? Could you get Prime on it? Like, like I'm just imagining the guy in the Amazon van pulling it out and trying to lug it to your door. Be like, shipping was free.
guy just he's so unafraid, and he's so curious, and he's always trying things. He just launched a new side product called Awake, which is it's the casket. It's in an energy drink called Awake for
Okay.
all the caskets. He started an insurance business, which is buy before you die. It's just like he just has fun with it, and people like it. So very unusual, very unlikely person. More unlikely business than anything else.
I was wondering if was there a connection between the caskets and the energy drink in terms of other than just like kind of being the opposite to each
Well,
other.
the connection is between the sausages, the beer, and the caskets. Right? So it's a full circle of entrepreneurs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Cause and effect right there. You're going to capture them this is like full life cycle marketing. Yeah.
So I actually have to tell you this, since you're a hockey player, I get a lot of calls from people since I came up through sales. I get a lot of people say, "Hey, I got this company, and they're doing really well. They did this and that, or I invested, or they have this technology," and then they whisper they have a sales problem. Like,
Hmm.
oh, you have a sales problem? Of course you have a sales problem. So I always ask the founder, all right, if you were to describe your sales team as a hockey team, Would it be a youth hockey team where like there's one kid that can put the puck in the net and no goalie, no one can skate backwards? Would it be a high school or a college team where you have two lines, two sets of D, a good goalie, maybe a coach from Vancouver, like from some good team? Or would it be the Stanley Cup champions where every player has been a star, a superstar, and you have systems in place and two backup goalie. Which one is your? And everyone's like, "Oh shit, I got a youth hockey team for my sales team."
And then there's a couple companies and they got the Broad Street Bullies.
Right, and the enforcers.
Yeah. We are here to mess you up. Give us your money.
Anyway, I had to tell you that one.
I love that. There one last story from the book that I wanted to pull out of you, which was you had mentioned it about the nonprofit, and I said, "Wait,
Yeah.
wait, don't tell me. I want to get this out on the show." And so, talk to me about the nonprofit that you profiled, because I don't think when I think about entrepreneurship, I typically think about the for-profit world, but I think you could argue starting a nonprofit is even harder
No,
because
totally.
yeah,
So we spent some time. We also have a number of experts in the book that we profiled some nonprofit experts to just say what are some of the myths about being a nonprofit. The big myth is that it's not competitive; it's super competitive, and that just what you care about isn't what other people care about. So we profiled a guy named Marvin Pierre who grew up in basically a really tough neighborhood in Queens, and he would walk to school each day, and there was a guy named Jungle who was a homeless man who would say to Marvin, "Stay in school, young man." So it was like really interesting that Marvin said, like, if you're open to it, mentors can present themselves in a whole bunch of different ways. Anyway, he got a scholarship to Tabor, which is a prep school in Massachusetts, then to Trinity College, then to Goldman Sachs on Wall Street. But he was asked to go talk to a school in Brooklyn about his story, and he saw this group of students that had these numbers next to their name, and the numbers were really low. They were their reading comprehension level, and he's like, "These kids are going to get into trouble. They're not going to get through school. They're going to get it. Might even be in prison." So he said, "I have to do something about it." So he started a nonprofit called 8 Million Stories, and it basically helps kids get through high school, get their GED, get into college. And he had 62 kids in his first class, and all of them got through. So the passion, it's a sort of living a life of passion and compassion. And I just wanted to tell that story because he had to go through all the same hard things that entrepreneurs do. The problem with the problem. How do you raise money? How do you pivot? How do you scale? And so, when we talk about entrepreneurship, I think to your point, like nonprofits are just as important as the super successful companies that grow and make a lot of money.
I love that. My wife ended when I was starting this company, my wife was working for a nonprofit and was almost in a nonprofit role. We'll put it that way. It was she's got a very big heart, and it was amazing that to be able to do something like that for folks that needed some help. But I remember thinking, man, like just for them to keep the lights on, it was just such a tremendous amount of work relying on so many people taking way less than they're worth. And so anyone who's doing that, yeah, props to them.
Yeah, no, I thought we wanted to, we only did one nonprofit, but the same everything we talk about of the successes and failures was similar in nonprofits as for profit.
Incredible. And so as we're thinking about kind of the closing it out here, when I think about the book, I'm curious, how are you going about promoting it other than being on the show, which is, going to get you internet fandom immediately, obviously, to all our 10,000 YouTube subs. Just from answer a personal question, like, what's your process for marketing the book? Where are you going? Because I think one of the things that the folks that listen to the show really enjoy is I think they're going to enjoy the book. Right? It's got great stories in it. I've heard a few of them. I really enjoy the framing and the storytelling. And I think one of the reasons why folks listen to the show is to kind of get the inside on, like, what was it like to write the book? What was it like to
Mm.
be an entrepreneur? What was it like to? And so, what is it like being an author and having to go promote the book? What are your go to market channels for the book?
Yeah, so it's really interesting you asked that because I talked to a lot of people, a lot of authors who would. There was one thing that was common. It was, my publisher doesn't do any selling; you have to do all the selling. And it sounded a little bit like a lot of tech founders I've worked with. Well, my product's so good, why doesn't it sell itself? I don't need sales. But
Mhm.
the best companies have the best product and the best sales teams, and it's the same thing with the book. So for me, it's been really interesting is I'm a B2B infrastructure software guy. I spent 30 years in that. This is a B2C play, D2C, B2C, and I've learned a ton. I have worked with a marketing guy who's taught me all the new stuff on all the social media modernization. done lots of book events, have a mailing list, newsletter and all that sort of stuff. But I just really find it fun and inspiring to tell other people's stories because maybe we'll inspire somebody who thinks they have an idea for a startup to do it and to have and then read both of our books to sort of say let's understand this before we do it, and so the likelihood of success is going to be higher than if you don't, if you just sort of have this idea and just get started without like doing the research.
I want to close with what's one thing that, having written the book, that you think that was like one takeaway where you're like, oh, I didn't, it's something you understand now that you didn't get before, kind of about the content of the book.
Yeah, I think it's the driving sort of commonality, the through line with all the entrepreneurs is just sort of curiosity and sort of like scratching the itch of can I do this? How do I think about doing it? And in being curious, because I mean, I think all of our entrepreneurs are curious about a better way to do something, or is there a market for my idea? And then being really resilient. Those are the sort of the two things, like curiosity and resiliency, because as you know, there's 1,000 ways to kill a startup, right? And we've seen a bunch of them. But if you keep after it, it does become a gift to yourself.
I love it. Lou, thank you so much for coming on the show. If people are looking to check out the book, it's Unlikely Entrepreneurs. It's loushipley.com/book is where you can find most of the information, but I'm assuming it's also on Amazon,
It's
Barnes and
on
Noble.
Amazon. Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. Great.
Um, if somebody's looking to get in touch, they want to, bulk order the books or talk to Lou about, content of the book, what's the best way for them to
Yeah.
reach you?
Connect on LinkedIn and we absolutely happy to meet all your subscribers and get to know them. And if I can help in any way, happy to help.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Lou.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for listening. We'll catch you all next time.